So again, Boker Tov and Shavua Tov, and we hope that Bezrat Hashem would have good news and things would, as happened in that time by Yamim Ahem, so we would have in our days, Bazman Hazeh. And I thought that today it would be interesting to do a Venahafochu Shiur. So usually our Sunday morning shiur in the last few years is about the great rabbis, the great Torah people of the Jewish people, and we speak about their biography, we speak about their Torah, what we have to learn from them. And I thought it would be nice to have also for Purim, would have a biography not of the rabbi, not of Mordechai, but Nahafochu would have a biography of Haman, the most infamous villain, I think, in all of the Tanakh. And really, he is the typical villain because it's hard to find someone who is so one-dimensional in the way that the Tanakh describes him as Haman. Meaning, he does not appear only for a pasuk. He is the main hero of Megillat Esther. I would say even more than Mordechai and Esther. Just one small example. Haman is the only one to whose heart we are being given a view, meaning we are not being told what Mordechai's thoughts are, just only about his actions, his deeds, or what he said. The same applies also to Esther. However, for Haman, we are being told, Vayomer Haman belibo, right? And Haman said in his heart. Now, so that makes him into the main hero of Megillat Esther because he is the one depicted in the most rich way. However, he is one-dimensional in the meaning that he is Rasha, right? He almost, I would say, has no redemptive quality. Usually in the Tanakh, even people that are negative, so Ishmael, right, is negative, but it seems from the story also has good sides, and Chazal tell us that he made tshuva in the last of his days. And Esau, we are being told about his kibud horim, etc., etc. And you come to Haman, and he is like an Hollywood villain hero. So he is only bad. Nothing, no good qualities about him. So we would like to learn a little about this Haman. Now, obviously, we speak here not from a historical point of view. In history, a very, very little about Haman. I'm using this sefer I have. That's about the Persian Empire. If you can see, Mabat History, Archaeology, Geography. So they have historic, archaeological, and geographical view on Megillat Esther. And they say that while other names mentioned in the Megillah, we do have some historical information about them. Of course, Achashverosh, who is usually being identified as Chashyaresh, this success. That is a known Persian king. And we even have something that seems to be Mordechai and Esther mentioned in Persian writings. And but for Haman, we have almost nothing. I guess after he was hanged, they erased, just in communist Russia, they erased every mention of him from the kingdom annals. We do have some mention of a guy named Hamdata, which according to the Megillah may be the father of Haman. So maybe we have some information about him, but that's more or less all. So everything we'd say today is the way that Chazal saw Haman. Now, when you come to Midrashim, as I think we all know, then some of them may be revealing historical traditions that the sages were holding. Some of them come to teach a lesson, a message. Some of them, especially when you speak about Megillat Esther, some of them just come to ridicule Haman. I think that there is no question that some of them Midrashim on Esther, they are part of, you may say, the colorful experience of the Chag, of the holiday. So that's also must be taken into account. So I'll try to build with these parts that we find, these segments that we find in Chazal, in the words of our Mesorah, of our tradition. And again, it's not a historical view on Haman, but more of how tradition had interpreted this person, Haman Harasha. And I would share with you now the source sheet. Okay, can you see that? I hope so. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהכל נהיה.
Yes, אנחנו יכולים לראות את זה.
Okay, תודה. So we continue. So we begin with Haman's ichus, right? Every good villain also must have some ichus. So what is the genealogy of Haman? We are being told in the Megillah we only have that he's Haman ben Hamedata Hagagi. So we are being given the name of Hamdata, who may be his direct father or maybe somewhere earlier in his lineage. And we are being told it's Agagi, which directs him, links him to Agag, the Amalekite king. That's what we have from the Megillah. Assuming that there was only one Agag, who is the Amalekite king, obviously one can argue that there were more Agags, and then we have no knowledge about the lineage of Haman from the Megillah. However, we have this explanation that was given by Rav Yosef, Tirgem Rav Yosef. בתר פתגמה יעדן, אחר הדברים האלה, after these events, just a second, רבי מלכה אחשוורוש, יתמן המדתה אגגי, so the king Achashverosh had Ravi, meaning made great, the Haman Amdata Agagi, and then we have a full list of names connecting Haman to Esau. So Bar Biza, the name of Haman's father was Biza, Bar Aflitus, Bar Dayus, Bar Dizut, Bar Parud, Bar Niden, Bar Balken, Bar Antemirus, Bar Hord, Bar Hororus, Bar Shagar, Bar Nagar, Bar Parmasta, Bar Vaizata. So we can see that some of the names are recurring. Bar Amalek, Bar Lechinte de Eliphaz. So Amalek is the son of the concubine of Eliphaz. And Eliphaz, she was called Timna, and Eliphaz was the firstborn, Buchrei, the Esau. So you get here a full lineage for Amalek, for Haman. However, you immediately can see the problem. Some of the names here, almost for sure, are Roman names. Antemirus, that's not a Semitic name. And Horus, also, what one immediately suspects is that these are names of infamous villains from Jewish history much later than Haman. I mean, one can, again, all that I say now is speculations, but won't it make sense that Antimarus is Antipatrus? And Horus is, of course, it's Reish and Dalet. It's very, very short. It's very, very easy. It's Hordus. And we have here Nidan, which is Niran, or Niron Kesar. So these are known villains from Jewish history, much, much after Haman, right? Haman is in the time of the beginning of the Second Temple. All of these Roman names are from the end period. So that is 400 years later of Haman. They cannot be his fathers. But, so again, did Rav Yosef had a direct access to some Megillat Yuchsin, to some list of genealogy of Haman, and he was listing the names that he received in tradition, or that what he tries to say here is that all of the Reshaim we know from our history are interconnected. That is, as I would say that, I don't know, that Chaminai is the son of Amalek. I do not necessarily speak, if I would say such a sentence, I would not necessarily speak in genetic terms. What I would mean to say is that he should be seen in this framework of Reshaim, of enemies of the Jewish people and of God. So here, what this Midrash says, a part of linking Haman directly to Amalek and to Esau, it says it's all part of one big evil family, right? The family of the haters of Am Yisrael, the haters of Am Yisrael. Now, Chazal also saw that as interweaved into the Megillah, meaning this origin of Haman was also part of the motivation to his action. So he's not just working as a singular Haman, some singular individual Rasha, walking alone in the time of the Persian Empire. But he represents, also in his own mind, he represents this wave of what we would in modern language call the anti-Semitics, who are Israel-hated. So, for example, that's from the Midrash in Esther Rabbah, source bit. ויבז בעיניו לשלוח יד במרדכי לבדו. So we're being told that when Mordechai refused to bow down to Haman, Haman could just kill Mordechai. But ויבז בעיניו, it was lowly in his eyes to attack Mordechai alone. And that's why he decided to attack the whole of Am Israel. Now, this word va'ivaz, maybe it rings a bell. It sounds familiar. The Midrash says, va'ivaz be'inav lishloach yad be'mordechai levado, bazui ben bazui. So va'ivaz meant it was degrading. The Midrash says, you are a degraded son of a degraded. Why? Because in Bereshit it says, Va'ivez Esav et ha-bechora. Esav looked down, he disregarded being a firstborn, and he was willing to sell it for nezid adashim, right? For soup, for a bowl of soup. So it's the same Va'ivez. It's the same. He says it comes from the same origin as Esau, right? He's the son of the son of the son of the son, the grandson of Esau. So as Esau has such an ego that he didn't think that being a firstborn is important. If I am Esau, then that's all. I don't need anything else. In the same way, Haman, it thought that just being an opponent to one man, to an individual, to Mordechai, that is not worthy enough. If I am Haman, he says to himself, then I am only worthy of being an enemy of a whole nation. Another midrash, אמר רבי חנינא, כל מי שהוא אומר שהקדוש ברוך הוא ותרן הוא התוותרון בני מאוי. So anyone who says רבי חנינא, that God is letting things averot go unpunished. Rabbi Hanina says he would be punished himself. אלא מה רכאפי וגבי delay. God may be waiting, but in the end, every bad deed would be punished. Gavi delay, he would take what he owns. And what is the example he gives? זעקה אחת הזעיק יעקב לעשיו. דכתיב כי שמוע עשיו ודברי אביו ויזעק זעקה. So when Yaakov takes the blessings, takes the brachot from Esau, and Esau comes into the room and he brings the food to Yitzchak, and Yitzchak says, no, I already gave the blessings to your brother. So it says in the Torah that Esau cried a bitter cry. ויזעק זעקה. And where was the punishment for that? When that was paid? בעיר בשושן הבירה, שנאמר, ויזעק, here, who is crying? Mordechai. ויזעק זעקה גדולה ומרה עד מאוד. So the Midrash says that these stories should be read together. The story of the fight between Yaakov and Esau for the brachot. And the war between Mordechai and Esau, Mordechai and Haman, for the destruction of the Jewish people. These stories should be read together because they are a continuation of one long struggle. And that is, in one sentence, I think that is the most important lesson that Chazal want to teach us about the Megillah. The Megillah is included in the Tanakh because Chazal wanted to teach us that even something that looks very mundane, very secular, the name of God does not appear in the Megillah. So, and these are individuals who propel this, the story, the plot, seemingly only out of egoistic and personal motivations. However, Chazal say we include it in Tanakh because you must understand that even these events should be read in light of the whole history of the Jewish people, and here their arch enemies, right, Amalek and Esau. Even more clearly, and the Megillah has a few translations to Aramaic. As you can understand, the Jews in many places could not read Hebrew. It was very difficult for them to understand Hebrew. So they had, just as nowadays there are English translations, they had Aramaic translations. However, you have different types of translations. You have translations that are literally, and you have translations that are much more Midrashic. And the Midrashim are interweaved into the text that is being interpreted. Something like, I guess, some of the art scrolls that sometimes you read and you're not sure what from what they write is just a plain translation and what is that they add from commentaries. So here we have one of these type of translations which have been enriched with Midrashic material. And that's what it says on the pasuk that Haman decided that he would not kill Mordechai alone, but he should kill the whole Jewish nation. So I'm in source Dalit. Ve'havei chavach kadomi. It was not serious to him. Lo shuta yadoi, to raise his hand, lemiktol yat Mordechai lechudoi, and to kill Mordechai alone. Arum chaviule, because he saw the Mordechai ati min Yaakov. He was told that Mordechai came from Yaakov. The shakal min Esav abba de avui de Haman yat bechorta veyat birchata. So he understood that Mordechai comes from the Jewish people, and the Jewish people are the ones that are the descendants of Yaakov. And Yaakov, Haman says to himself, Yaakov was the one that took from my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather the firstborn and the brachot and the blessings. So Haman tells himself, I would like to kill Yehudai. I would like to kill all of the Jews. Inun Ama de Mordechai, who are the nation of Mordechai. So here you see that according to Chazal, it's not only that in the background we should know that this specific struggle is part of a longer story, but that Haman himself maybe was conscious that his war is not only against Mordechai, but against the whole of the Jewish nation. And he himself, being Haman, represents not only himself, but an opposite ideology to the Jews. So that's very interesting. Obviously, it does say so almost explicitly in the Megillah. When Zeresh tells Haman, as you remember, after Haman is being commended by Achashverosh to take Mordechai and put him on the horse and walk in front of him and shout that that is what would be done to the man, that the king wants his glory. And then Haman comes back home and he said, Avel v'chafui rosh, and is being told by his wife, which is, I don't know, it's difficult to say that she's a loving and supportive spouse. So she tells him, you know, if Mordechai is from the seed of the Jews, Mizera Yehudim, then the way that you begin to fall, you would completely collapse. So, as I said, not very supportive, but what you see here is that at least Zeresh obviously understands the war between Haman and Mordechai, not only to be between these two individuals, Haman and Mordechai, but Mordechai is Mizera Yehudim, the war is against the Jews, and that's why if you are beginning to fall in front of them, you'd completely lose. Now, another small and very peculiar touched by Chazal is about the name of the mother of Haman. So we are being told that maybe his father is called Hamdata. But what was the name of Haman's mother? So that's a Gemara in Baba Batra, Tzadik Aleph Amud Aleph. Amar Rav Chanan Barav Amar Rav, Imei de Avraham. So the mother of Avraham Avinu, her name was Amtalai bat Karnabu. Okay, that's the name. Amtalai bat Karnabu. Imei de Haman, Amtalai bat Orvati. So he has his mother's name, first name, who was the same first name as the mother of Avraham Avinu. That's, as I said, that's very peculiar. The Gemara explains that while the first name was the same, they came from different families. The mother of Avraham Avinu came from a family named Karnabu, which is the name of a bird that is you are allowed to eat. It's a taho. But the mother of Haman came from a family called Orev. And Orev is the bird, right? Orev. Orev. Excuse me, I'm missing the word. What is the translation of Orev? Check it.
Crow.
Raven?
Raven, yeah, thank you.
Crow, raven.
Crow, raven, yes. So that, of course, is impure. You are not allowed to eat it. And Chazal says, Simanach tameh tameh tahor tahor. So the mother of Avraham Avinu came from a family that its name was Tahor, then he became a tzaddik, and Haman became a Rasha. Now, as I said, that's a very peculiar midrash, because what exactly do they want to tell us? Why it is important that Avraham and Haman had the same name for their mother? Do they mean to say that Haman has something from Avraham inside him? I don't know. It's very, very interesting. And I would maybe try to say something about it as we would reach the end of the shiur. Now, all of that was regarding the ichus of Haman. However, what about his real life? So we meet Haman in the mid-story of his life, meaning we meet him when he's being taken by Achashverosh and made into a minister, into a sar, maybe the prime minister. But what was Haman doing all the years before? So you have a very interesting story that appears in a few versions in Chazal. I would read with you now the first version, which is from the Midrash Esther Rabbah. Because it is long, I also included an English translation. You see, if in the right you have the Hebrew, and in the left you have the English, and that is taken from Sephariah. So, Kevan the Chasal Mimitzvah. Now, where we are in the story, we are, Haman was told by Achashverosh to go to Mordechai, and as we said, to give him the clothes of the king, and put him on the king's horse, and walk in front of him, lead him, and shout. That's how would be done to the man that the king wants his glory. Fine. Now, Haman goes to Mordechai, but Mordechai is in the middle of Shmona Esrei. You always find these Jews, they are always in the middle of Shmona Esrei when you want something from them. So Haman has to stand there and wait for Mordechai to finish his Shmona Esrei. Now there is a whole story to that, but I'm beginning from this point. Kevan de Chasal Mimitzlei. So after Mordechai finished his prayer, Amar le Haman le Mordechai levosh haden levusha de malka. So Haman came with the clothes of the king and told Mordechai, now you have to wear the clothes of the king. Amar lo, so Mordechai told him, Mat mevaze malchut, why are you dishonoring the monarchy? It barnash lavish levusha de malchuta velo sach. So how can I put on the king's clothes without taking a bath first? And you have to remember that Mordechai was fasting and he was not showering. Okay, now the problem is that, back then you don't have private bathrooms in the houses. You have a public bath and you have people that serve you there. Azal ba'abalana velo ashkach. So they began to look for an open bathhouse, but they couldn't find anything open. So in another midrash it says that Esther had sent a decree and closed all of the bathhouses. Now there was no other way מה עבד? What could Haman do? אסר חרצי ועל ואסרי. So Haman took off his loins and went in, and Haman himself served Mordechai, and left him. Kevan de Nafak, now after finally, now as you can understand, that's a great degrading for a man like Haman, who is the prime minister, to bath this simple Jew. However, he had no other choice, so he's bathing him. They finished. אמר לו, סב לבש עד כלילה, now take this crown. אמר לי, מה את מבזה מלכות? So again, Mordechai says to him, I cannot put the crown on. Why? It barna shlavish כלילה דמלכותא ולא מספר? Can I wear the crown without a haircut? Okay, as you can imagine, they walk and they try to find a barber, but they could not find one. So what does Haman do? He went to his house and bought scissors and sat and gave Mordechai a haircut. So Haman himself is giving a haircut to Mordechai. Sharei umit'anach. Now Haman began to sigh. He began to krachzen, right? So Haman became a Jew, right? Oy vey. Amar le malach man. So Mordechai asked him, why, Haman? Why do you sigh? Why do you say oy vey? Amar le vai leavua deu gavra ma'avir dumin panton komin kelato avin balan sapar. Woe to this man's father, because my father has been removed from being a high official, and now his son, has been removed from being a high official and an overlord, and has been made a bath attendant and a barber. So Haman says, look what happened to me. Instead of being a high official, now I have to bath you and give you a haircut. So Mordechai responded, ובהאיש שהילת לך, לית אנא חכים, להבוי דאו גברא בלן מספר בכפר קריינוס. ואת משכחת מני ספרא דידי. So Mordechai said to him, this is why I asked you. Do I not know that the father of that man, meaning of you, was a bath attendant and a barber in a certain place in the Galil called Kefar Karainus? And you have found these barber tools. So Mordechai reveals to us here that Haman comes from very humble origin. Now it may be that his great-great-great-great-grandfather was the king of Amalek, but the Amalek nation was long gone, and everyone has to make a living. So Haman's father became a barber and a bath attendant in this place called Kfar Karyanus. So Mordechai says to Haman, you shouldn't be ashamed. You just continue the work of your father with the same tools. Okay, and they continue, the story continues. As you can see, it's also a parody on Haman, this Midrash, and as the story continues, Haman tries to put Mordechai on the horse, but Mordechai says, it's a high horse, I am a small Jew, I cannot go up on the horse. And Haman has no other choice, he has to bow down, and Mordechai steps on his back and go up to the horse. While he's stepping on his back, the story goes, he also kicks Haman from behind. And Haman says, why do you do that? Didn't we learn that you shouldn't be happy when your enemy falls? So Mordechai tells him, that is correct for Jews, other Jews. But for people like you, we say, Ata al bamoteimo tidroch. We should stand on your neck. That's the answer, the report of Mordechai. So that's the story in the Midrash. We see from here, if we take what we want, meaning the biography of Haman, we see from here that Haman's father was a barber and a bath attendant. That is the story in Esther Rabbah, in the Midrash. In the Gemara in Megillah, there is a slightly different version. Again, it's source Zayin, so Haman is krachzening, is sighing, and Mordechai asks him, why do you sigh? אמר לי גברא דאבך לי למלכה מכולו רברבנוי, השת לי שבי בלנאי וספר. So I am the prime minister. Now I became a bath attendant and a barber. אמר לי רשע, you evil man, ולאו ספר של כפר קרצום היית. And we have a tradition, Tana, Haman, ספר של כפר קרצום היה 22 שנה. So Haman was the barber in this place, maybe near Karyanus, maybe it's the same place, maybe it's an adjacent village named Kfar Kartsum for 22 years before he became. So Haman is really a Cinderella story almost, right? It's from rags to riches. He begins as a barber, and for 22 years he was a barber. And becoming a prime minister was only a second career. Now, how that had happened? How Haman managed to climb the social ladder, the economic social ladder, from being a barber into being a prime minister. Now, almost certainly, as if many other things, the way goes through the woman. Look for the woman. As they say, behind every successful man stands a woman. And that is also correct for Haman. So, who was Haman's wife? We know her name. It stays in the Megillah. Her name was Zeresh. However, from where did Zeresh come? So, again, in one of the Targumim, one of the translations to Esther, we learn the following. That's in source Chet. Vizdar is Haman, so Haman was hurried, ve'aleveite, he went to his home, ve'shadar ukra yatrechimoi, and he called his lovers, his ohavav, his friends, ve'yad Zeresh reshi'ata, and he called Zeresh the evil, of course. He didn't call her Zeresh the evil, he called her Zeresh, or Zershile or something, so he called Zeresh reshi'ata, in Tete, she was his wife, and here we are being given her origin, her family. Brat Tatnei Pachat Ever Naara. So she was the daughter of Tatnai, who was the Pecha, meaning the minister of the Eastern Jordan, Ever Nahara. So that's a very important information piece. We know Tatnai. Who was Tatnai? So now we speak about Haman's father-in-law, right? The father of Zeresh. He appears in Sefer Ezra. And to understand, we have to understand the historical context in which the Megillat Esther, is situated. So Megillat Esther, as I said, the king is Achashverosh, usually identified. There is a machloket in Chazal, but for our purposes, he is identified with Chashyaresh, that is Xerxes. So Xerxes comes after Koresh. Koresh allowed the Jews, as we remember, to leave Shushan, to leave Babel, and to go back to their homeland in Israel, in Judea, and rebuild Beit HaMikdash. All of that was allowed by Koresh already before Achashverosh. However, the building was stopped. Now, who was responsible to issue the stop order? The answer is our Haman's father-in-law, Tatnai. In Sefer Ezra, we are being told that when the house of God was beginning to be built, Tatnai was the pacha of Avar Nahara, and that's exactly the man that the Targum is referring to as the father of Zeresh. So Tatnai sent a letter to Daryavesh, the king before Achashverosh, and in the letter he said, you know, the Jews, this is a problematic nation. Every time that they are feeling secure, they revolt against the king. They revolted against Nebuchadnezzar. And I would suggest, he says, I would recommend that you would not let them build Yerushalayim and Beit HaMikdash. Otherwise, they would revolt again. And indeed, he is successful in halting the building of the Beit HaMikdash. That is the father of Zeresh. Now, he is very rich. He himself is the Pecha. So he is the local governor responsible from the Persian Empire on the whole region of the Jordan. And I would assume that he gave a nice gift to his daughter when she married Haman. Now, Haman, again, he was not rich at all. He was a barber. However, he came from an important family, from the family of kings, of Amalek. So I guess it's matzah min et mino. So Tatnai was rich and powerful, but did not have the ichus. And Haman was poor and in a weak state. However, he came from a chashuv, an important family. So Tatnai said, if I would marry with him, I would get legitimacy and he would get money. That's a good deal for everyone involved. And so the marriage took place. That is the context of Haman marriage, and that is how he became so rich. As it says in the Midrash Esther Rabbah, source Yud, Rabbi Pinchas Amar, Shnei Ashirim Amdu Ba'olam. So there were two rich people that stood in the world. אחד לישראל ואחד לעובדי כוכבים. So who are these two rich people? One stood for Am Israel and the other for the Gentiles. ולא עמד להם ממונם אלא לרעתם. But however, their money, instead of helping them, only harmed them. Who are these two? Korach in Am Israel. He had the treasures of gold and silver that Yosef hid, and he found them, and he became rich, but he used this riches in order to revolt against Moshe Rabbeinu, and he paid a heavy price. And the second one is Haman, and he came from the Gentiles. Lakach otzarot malchei Yehuda. He received the treasuries of the kings of Judah. Now, how this guy received the treasuries of the kings of Judah? Of course, to me it's simple. And the answer is that he was given them by his father-in-law. His father-in-law was the man responsible for the whole area, and he was able to put his hands on these treasures, and that's how Haman became rich. כיוון שראה המלך את עושרו, when Achashverosh saw how rich Haman was, Achashverosh was a man, maybe you know this type of world leader that admire rich people. Maybe you heard about such people. He admires rich people. So when he saw how rich he is, he made him into his prime minister. And he said, Gidal HaMelech et Haman. Right, so that's the story of Haman's humble origin, but then he was catapulted into greatness by successful marriage. However, it seems that the gift that the dunya that Haman received when he married into this family was not only the money, but also Zeresh. And Zeresh was the engine behind Haman. That's very interesting. Again, another midrash now from Mishlei. אמר רבי לוי, שני עשירים גדולים היו בעולם, אחד בישראל ואחד באומות העולם. So again, these two rich people, Haman and Korach. קורח בישראל והמן באומות העולם, ושניהם שמעו לנשיהם. So both of them were pushed by their wives, ושניהם נפלו, and that caused their demise. So I'm skipping a Korach for now. Let's speak about Haman. Haman הרשע שמע לעצת אשתו ונפל, שנאמר ותאמר לו זרש אשתו וכל אוהביו יעשו עץ גבוה. Zeresh was the one that pushed him to build the gallows for Mordechai, right, to prepare the tree to hang Mordechai. Now, that was the tree upon which Haman was hanged. If instead of pushing Haman into murdering Mordechai, Zeresh should tell him, no, it's not so important, so it doesn't bow down to you. You know, honey, I love you. She could have cut him down. And if she would have done that, the whole story would not have happened. We would have been spared all of that. However, instead of calming him down, she only pushed him into trying to kill Mordechai. And by that, she opened the door to the disaster that fell upon, in the end, their own family. And that is, so that is, again, very, very, very interesting, the way that Chazal saw Haman. So obviously Haman was, don't be mistaken, it's not that Haman was some tzaddik, right, a righteous person that fell into the hands of Zeresh, and she manipulated him into the destruction of Am Israel. Of course, that's not the story. He was a Rasha, son of a Rasha, and he came from a family of Amalekim and haters of Am Israel. But she was the one that gave him the ability to do so. Because as long as he was just an anti-Semitic barber, well, there were millions of people, maybe hundreds of millions, throughout history that were just poor anti-Semitics. But they couldn't do much harm. But when he became one of the richest people in the Persian Empire and then became the prime minister, now he can do a lot of damage. Now he can do a lot of damage. And she was pushing him, she was enabling and pushing him into doing so. Only one question remains. How Haman, after we accept that he was the son of Amalek, so he was in the area of Eretz Israel, and he was a barber, and then he married good, and now he is rich. But how did he came to Shushan? Why didn't he stay in his father-in-law house in the eastern of the Jordan or in the Galil? Why did he come to Shushan? And here we have a beautiful Agada, again with many versions. I chose here a Yemenite version of this story. Vayetze Haman, the story begins from the pasuk in Megillat Esther, that Haman went out of the party of Esther, Haman and Achashverosh, he was Sameach v'tov lev. וכירות Haman et Mordechai, but when he saw Mordechai, and Mordechai didn't bow down, וימלא Haman חימה. Haman became very angry. אמרו, so it was being said, לא לחינם היו מתקוטטים. So it was not, the fight between Mordechai and Haman is not for vain. As we said, it's not only about egos, a clash of egos. אלא קטטה קדומה הייתה ביניהם. Here is something that goes back, that goes deep. Why? כשהיו ישראל בונים חומות ירושלים בימי עזרא. So when Am Israel were building the walls of Yerushalayim at the time of Ezra, באו עליהם השונאים ומנעו אותם מלבנות. So came Israel's enemies and tried to block them, prevent them from building. אמרו להם, לא ברשות המלך אתם בונים. The building was not allowed by the king. והם אומרים, אין לנו בונים, אלא ברשותו. The Jews said, no, we have a permission. אמרו להם השונאים, so the enemies of עם ישראל told them, בררו מכם אחד, ואנו נברור לנו אחד, וילכו ויודיעו למלך. So the haters said to עם ישראל, let's send lobbyists. So you would send a lobbyist, and we will send a lobbyist, and he would come to the king's court, and they would fight out between them, and they would come back with the king's decision. So the Gentiles didn't find anyone as evil as Haman HaRasha, and he was also rich, which was very important, in Achashverosh court. וישראל בררו להם Mordechai. So Mordechai and Haman both went out from Eretz Israel as part of the struggle about the building of Yerushalayim and Beit HaMikdash. That is the context of Megillat Esther. Mordechai came in order to convince Achashverosh to build Beit HaMikdash, and Haman is there in order to convince Achashverosh to not build Beit HaMikdash. That's the background of the story. ועשו להם צידה והלכו. So both of them took the train. I took the caravan together. These two enemies are going together, walking together to Shushan הבירה. והיה מרדכי הצדיק אוכל פתאום מעט. However, Mordechai was righteous and he was strong, had strong will. So he ate slowly in order to preserve food for the future. כמו שאמרו חכמים, המהלך בדרך לא יאכל יותר משני רעבון. So if you are walking in the way, don't eat too much because you don't know where would be the next time you can resupply. But Haman HaRasha אכל ולא השגיח. But Haman was impulsive, as you can see from the whole of the Megillah. And if he wanted something, he had to get it. He is not a man that would hold down. So Haman ate and ate. חסר מזונו. And he had not enough food. ועליו הוא אומר, ובטן רשעים תחסר. And the stomach of the evil ones would not have enough. כיוון שלא מצא פת בדרך לאכול, because he couldn't find the bread in the way to eat. So Haman finished all the food that he took, all of his supplies, and now Haman was hungry. בא לו אצל מרדכי. So he has no other choice. He comes to Mordechai, והיה משתטח לפניו, and he begs him, להלוות לו כיכר אחד, please, give me one loaf of bread. ולא היה רוב, מרדכי said, no, I won't give you. לסוף אמר לו מרדכי להמן, אם אני נותן לך כיכר אחד, אתה מוכר עצמך לי? מרדכי says to Haman, you know, if I would give you a loaf of bread, would you sell yourself to be my slave? Now Haman had no choice. He is hungry. Now, of course, we can see here a play on the theme of Esau selling the birthright to Yaakov, right? So as you can see, it's an old struggle. So Haman says, yes, I would sell you myself to a slave. אמר לו, אין לי קלף שנכתוב בו שטר לקיחתך. So Haman says, we have a problem. I don't have a parchment to write on it that you are selling yourself to me. אמר לו, so Haman says, you know, הרי סנדל שלי כתוב בו. So I have this sandal, you can write on the sandal of Mordechai. מיד כתב המן על סנדלו של מרדכי. So Haman wrote on the sandal, on the shoe of Mordechai. I, המן האגגי, עבדו של מרדכי היהודי, I'm the slave of Mordechai the Jew, שנמכרתי לו בכיכר לחם אחת. And I was sold for one loaf of bread. וכשעלה לבסוף לגדולה, והיה מרדכי יושב בשער המלך, שהוא יוצא ובא, now you understand that Mordechai would not bow down. Instead of bowing down, Mordechai would sit with his legs crossed, his sandal in the air. And Haman, every time he goes through, he sees Mordechai presenting this star, like this testimony that Haman sold himself as a slave to Mordechai. So that's again, it is half a parody, of course, but it is also telling us how Haman and Mordechai found themselves in Shushan. Again, as lobbyists for the building or the stopping of the building of Beit HaMikdash, and that is the pre-context, we may say, of the whole rivalry between Haman and Mordechai. Mordechai would not bow down to Haman because they are there for very opposite motivations. Okay, so now we understand more or less what is going on. We understand all the introduction, we may say, to Megillat Esther. But now what remains to understand is the falling of Haman. Now, according to Chazal, Haman was the same Memuchan mentioned in the first chapter of Megillat Esther as the advisor that gave Achashverosh the advice to kill Vashti. Now, what was his reason for the killing of Vashti? So, according to one of the commentaries of by our sages, by Chazal, Haman himself had a daughter, and he was hoping that he would be able to marry his daughter with Achashverosh. He himself made his fortune through marrying good, so I guess that he learned this lesson. You can marry up. So I can take my daughter, for things to himself. I would get rid of Vashti, then I can insert my daughter into the king's palace. However, it didn't work. He was able to get Vashti killed, but according to the Midrash, when Vashti's daughter, Haman's daughter went in the whole process of 6 months in oil and 6 months in other ointments, and then she was supposed to meet with the king. The Midrash said that she had a terrible smell from her mouth, and so the king was not interested. Now, of course, that's a parody, and it's a joke on Haman's expense, but it tells us what were the type of aspirations that Haman held. Even there is, according to one version of the story, Haman was a relative of Bigtan Vateresh, and he was also hoping to get rid of the king himself, and maybe to replace him. So obviously, at a certain point in time, Haman became Again, in a modern interpretation, in a modern definition, you would say that he became a narcissist. He became sure that he is in the center of the world. And in one of the most pathetic verses in the whole I think, in the whole of Tanakh, right? Again, we have Mordechai refusing to bow down to Haman, either because of the whole story about the Beit HaMikdash, or because Haman saw himself as God, and so bowing down to him, while you are allowed to bow down to a human being in order to greet him. But if this person sees himself as a god, as a deity, then you are not allowed to bow down to him because that's avodah zarah. So Haman saw himself as a god. And that's why, as I said, in one of the most pathetic verses in the Megillah, we are being told that Haman returns to his home. And he says to his wife and to his advisors, he tells them at Kvod Oshro Verov Bana, so he's a rich person, and he has many sons, he's a big family, and the king gave him a great position, everything is beautiful. And even he is the only one, together with the king, to be invited, to be summoned to the party with the queen. וכל זה איננו שווה לי, he says, but all of that worth nothing. When I see Mordechai Yehudi sitting in the king's gate and he doesn't bow down. So that is it's so human, but so sad. You have everything. Everything. You have money, you have family, you have position, you have honor, everything that a man can aspire to. And it's all nothing to you. He says, "Eineno shove li." It is nothing for me. Why? There is one person that doesn't bow down. One person doesn't bow down. So that is an obsession with his position, with his honor. And when people become so obsessed with their own kavod, then nothing can satisfy them. Nothing can satisfy them. That is as we say, Ohev kesef lo isba kesef. If someone becomes obsessed to gathering wealth, to gathering money, then he would never be satisfied. He would always want the next $1 million, the next investment. He would never be satisfied with what we have, what he has. And the same goes for a man. He wants respect, he wants honor, he wants to be honored, and nothing would satisfy him. And even one person in the world does not bow down, then everything was zero. And he would risk everything and he would lose everything because of one person that does not bow down. And that's how Haman, as we all know, is losing everything. He's being hanged, he and 10 of his children, and the whole plot is overturned. V'na'afohu, and the Jews are gaining victory on their enemies. However, there is one small question that remains, and that is regarding Haman's legacy. So what is this legacy, the legacy that such a person leaves behind? So here we see something very interesting. We know that one of the main things that the Megillah insists on is that the Jews didn't take anything from the enemies that they fought against. Although according to the king's commandment, they were allowed, the decree allowed them to take the spoils, they didn't send their hands to the spoils. That's how the Megillah says. Only one person they took his possessions, and that is, of course, Haman. It says explicitly in the Megillah that the king gave his ring from Haman, he transferred it to Mordechai, and Esther put Mordechai as responsible al Beit Haman. So Mordechai received the position and the wealth of Haman, and Chachamim takes it a step further in source Yud Zayin, that Mordechai took the riches of Haman and used them for Beit HaMikdash, which of course is very befitting, right? That the money that was supposed to be gathered against Beit HaMikdash, but it was taken originally from the kings of Judea, now returned to its rightful owners and was used to build Beit HaMikdash. But that is not enough. We have another extremely interesting source, and we end with it. Source Yud Chet. The Gemara states מבני בניו של המן למדו תורה בבני ברק. That is amazing. Think about it for a minute. Again, the Gemara says that the descendants of Haman, the sons of the sons, the children of Haman, were learning Torah in Bnei Brak. Now, who was the famous rabbi from Bnei Brak? You'd read it in a month from now in the Haggadah. Of course, in Bnei Brak was the place of Rabbi Akiva. Some commentators understand that what this Gemara means to say is that Rabbi Akiva was, we know that he was Ben Geirim, that Rabbi Akiva was the children of converts. So this Gemara supposedly is saying that Rabbi Akiva originated from Haman. Haman is the father of the great father of the great father, great father of Rabbi Akiva. I would say that is the final victory. So the final victory is not that you kill everyone. The final victory is that you win them over. So even Haman, it seems there was something good about him. You remember that we saw that the first name of his mother was the same as the first name of Avraham Avinu. So there was something there. Obviously, Haman was completely evil, and he got what he deserved. But even Haman, even Amalek, there is something about them, and in the right circumstances, it can be used for the good. So while Haman didn't believe in good, Haman believed in evil. He thought that he needs to completely eliminate all of the Jews. We, the Jews, even when we fight them, we say we believe in the goodness of the human being. And even if there is a certain human being who must be killed because he himself is evil, it may be that one of his descendants would still become good. We believe in the good, we fight for the good, and that's why מבני בניו של Haman למדו Torah בבני Brak. Right? One of the direct descendants of Haman was learning or teaching Torah in Bnei Brak. Maybe that was the great Rabbi Akiva, who is the master of all of Torah שבעל פה, of all of the oral Torah. And that's, I think, really a story of ונהפוכו, that even the evil can be turned into good. That is, I think, a proper message for Purim in general, and more specifically to our situation with all the unfortunate troubles that the circumstances and difficulties that we are right now in, and we are giving this shiur via Zoom instead of meeting personally. However, we hope and we pray and we believe that even from the bad, even from the evil, even from difficult situation, we may find salvation, we may find redemption, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu would show us miracles as in their days, so it will be in our days. B'mehera b'yameinu amen. Thank you for joining, and may you have Purim Sameach v'Shakет.
Amen.
תודה רבה, הרב
Thank
ברור.
you.
שבוע
Thank
טוב.
you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.